Well, we need to get started here.
Yeah, Joshua said definitely higher. Starting bid at 60, but we'll go higher.
No bidding on Shabbat.
No bidding on Shabbat. Sorry, that's true. That's true.
Oh.
Rabbi Rick,
Well, we're going to get started here.
There's so much love coming out of your visual sensors. These are your visual sensors. There's so much love coming at you through those visual sensors.
Well, I'm glad you sensed that.
Love and not daggers.
Better love than daggers, yes.
Yep.
Well, we're going to dive right in this morning, so to speak, figuratively. Because there's, we're not literally diving right now. Oh Lord.
Are we literally diving?
Literarily, yes, we are literarily diving. Well, let me focus our thoughts with this prayer. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of eternity, who has made us holy through his commandments and commanded us to engage in the study of all the words of Torah. Please, Adonai our God, make the words of your Torah sweet in our mouths and in the mouths of your people, the house of Israel, so that we, our descendants, and the descendants of your people, the house of Israel, may all know your name and study your Torah for its own sake. Blessed are you, Adonai, who teaches Torah to his people, Israel. Amen. Amen. Parashah Emor. When we were singing this morning, I was particularly moved as we were singing a very familiar term, Hava Nagila, right? Do you remember that?
Yeah.
When we sang that? I learned that when I was in elementary school, I think, second or third grade, for some unit on.
No, we had those music books in the state of California.
It was in the music book.
In the folk section.
Folk section. And I remember, and now when I see the words and I know a little bit about Hebrew, I said, wow, we just massacred that Hebrew in that day.
We had no idea we were singing Hebrew. We had no idea. It was like kumbaya. We didn't have no idea what any of that was about.
So in connecting my, second grade persona, which hasn't really advanced a lot since then, it's still in that thing. But I was just really moved because of, hopefully, what I'm going to try to communicate to you about our portion today. And this concept of awakening our brothers. That's a good thing, I think, to awaken, because I'm glad that I get awakened in the morning to start a new day, and I just really appreciated this connection of brotherhood. Awaken can be a consciousness that's not just our regular consciousness, but a deeper consciousness of who we really are, where we're functioning not just by rote, not just by instinct, not just by patterns that we've learned, but we're truly consciously aware of everything that's happening in our lives. Don and I have been talking recently about this concept of consciousness and kind of diving a little deeper into that. Being like an observer of our consciousness, because a lot of times our thoughts we're so involved in our thoughts. That's what we identify with. That's us. The whole Descartes, where it says, "I think, therefore I am." You've heard that statement. Mm-hmm. I think, therefore I am. And that concept that we are our thoughts, but no, I think we're more than that. Our consciousness is the observer of our thoughts, and I think Rav Shaul really nailed that when he said, Peter, one of the apostles, said, taking every thought captive to Messiah. Well, if you're able to take every thought captive to Messiah, that means you are the observer of your thoughts. They don't rule you. You know, you don't just exist in your thoughts, but you are able to observe them. And so this concept of awakening our brothers to a deeper consciousness where we can step back from our identities and our thoughts and observe and allow Messiah to be the interpreter and the one who's going to be directing us in how we respond to that. So I was just really moved by that concept of awakening ourselves, awakening our brothers, and with a joyful heart to the joy that it is to be and live and walk in God's presence. So, anyway, yes. So then one other thought before we actually get to our Torah portions. We're in the days of the counting of the Omer for those of you who are counting, and tonight we move into the 35th day, which is 5 weeks, a little more, right? And I hope you are experiencing just an advancement and refinement of your soul during this time. And I'm always reminded, of course, of this verse in Psalm 90, where the psalmist says, Limnot Yamenu Ken Hoda, teach us to count our days, Venavi Levav Chokma, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. And the essence of this verse could also be expressed not that we're counting our days, but making every day count. That's the concept, is when you are aware of that concept of count, that not only are the days passing, but we are focusing on making each day count, especially during this season, and that it is a purposeful counting, that our hearts may become wise in our walk. Our portion, Emor, we began today in this third section of this parashah. We began with verse 23 and 24, where it says, "Speak to the sons of Israel, saying, Daber el b'nei Israel Emor, b'chodesh hashvi'i ve'echad lachodesh ve'hiyeh lachem." In the 7th month, on the 1st of the month, it shall be for you Shabbaton, a special Sabbath. Zikron Torah, a remembrance of shouting. Mi Rakodesh, a holy assembly. So the whole chapter 23 really is a recounting of, or a counting of the God's appointed times, right, the calendar. And we enter this reading this week in the 7th month of the year with a statement about a day of shouting, which is what day? What has that become known as today? Yom Kippur? Yeah. It's also become known as Rosh Hashanah, the head of the year. Even though it's the 7th month, it's a new year. So that's where we enter this explanation of the holy days. And again, this reaches the concept of making each day count, not just counting the days and the calendar and the holidays and so forth of the year, but the significance of that cycle. You good? Okay, so I wanted to, because we're limited on time, I wanted to shift our focus towards the end of our reading. Today we do talk about the calendars and the meanings of those holidays, the high holidays of the fall that are described in our portion. And we actually get to walk through those as we're counting the Emor leading up to Shavu'ot, right?
Which is in a couple of weeks, on June 1st.
In a couple of weeks,
At our house.
at our house, we're gonna celebrate Shavu'ot, so. That's coming up, yeah. Pretty soon, in the next couple of weeks.
So you said you wanted to get to the weird story
Yeah,
that's in there.
can I just skip to the weird story?
Skip to the weird story.
Right.
Okay, here's the weird story.
Yeah, it's in 24, verse 10.
I thought I had that, oh, here it is, I do have this, okay.
Yeah.
24 verse 10. I want to jump to this weird story, because it fascinated me this week as I was reading it. And sometimes what I like to do is I like to clear my mind as much as I can, kind of set aside, if possible, any preconceived thoughts I might have about the text as I'm reading it, and just try to read it fresh and new, and just let the text bring forth questions in my mind, right? So I was doing that this week, and with this particular portion here, these few verses, because they are an anomaly to me. They've always been troubling, and I wanted to try to get a little more, I don't know, more of a handle on these verses, because they are so unusual. So let's look at verse 10, 24:10. Vayikra ben Isha Yisraelit. Israelis can say that really nicely. Israelit, and I just have trouble with the tongue for me. Israelit. So there was a son of an Israelite woman who went out. So Vayikra is to go out. So went out a son, ben Isha, a son of a woman, Israeli. Vehu ben Ish, Mitzri, and he was the son of an Egyptian man. Betoch b'nei Israel. Betoch is a very familiar word meaning among, mixed in. It's like the word among, but it's significant. It's picturing a significant blending, right? When you're among the people, it's not like you're just wandering, but you actually are among them in a form of belonging and connection and all that. So he's among the sons of Israel. Vayinatsu lamachane, and they fought in the camp. Ben ha-Yisraelit, a son of an Israelite, the Ish ha-Israeli, this son of this Israelite woman and an Israelite man. Okay, so and there's lots of people involved in here. So as I'm reading this, I'm gonna just kind of notice first of all that I'm reading a story, right? And which is also a little bit shocking because we've been reading, an order of the days, the holidays, and all this, and then all of a sudden, and there was a son of a man. I was like, whoa, now we're into a story. It's like we're reading legal code, and now we're going to tell a story about and for some silly reason, of course, Gilligan's Island came to mind. This is a story of a bunch of people or something where something happens and you're not expecting it and it happened, right? So anyway, it's just kind of shocking like that. So you're reading along and all of a sudden now here's a story. So why is this even here, right? So that's the first thing that kind of struck me. Now there was a man who was a son. You gonna say something? No. Okay. So I had to kind of stop for a moment and look at the characters here, right? And I don't have my. Look at the characters and say, okay, who are the characters in the story? First of all, there's an Israelite woman and an Egyptian man, right? You got that kind of in your mind? Yeah. Israelite woman and Egyptian man, and they have a son, right? And this son becomes the cursor, the one who curses. The son is the one who gets into trouble, right? And then you also have another Israeli, right, who he fights with. Right, so we have these four people involved in this story, this narrative. And this is, by the way, also because of the surprise of this story appearing right here, this is one of the only stories, narratives like this in the whole book of Vayikra. I mean, and I would argue that it's the only narrative story. Don mentioned Nadav and Avihu, right? Remember they? But that was kind of in the context of the inauguration of the temple and like an event that happened along. And it makes sense when you read that story in the text, right? This story just like boom comes out of
back at the ranch.
Nowhere, yeah. It's like yeah, like shifting gears into reverse instead of well. Anyway, you get it. So I think because of that, the way the Torah is written is it's saying that you need to pay attention here. It's like this might be really important amongst all the laws that came before and all the law that is coming after. This is a key case for you to examine and understand. And I'm thinking, I have no idea what's happening with this. I mean, I get that you get a general idea, but it's like, but why? What does this really mean? And we're talking about Torah here, so this should be very deep, very significant, very important thoughts and ideas. And so we have to take a look at this from a literary standpoint, right? And the problem with that is it's a lot of work. I don't know about for you, but to take a look at this, it's like studying Shakespeare. And did anybody ever take a class on Shakespeare in school? And and how it's not just like watching the play. I mean, now you have to get into all the details and all the stuff, and it gets really thick and dense because there's a lot of meaning in everything that's happening in his works and his words and his sentences and all that. And it just takes a lot of work. And so why can't you just tell the story and tell us what it means, and then we can all go to lunch and go to our next class or whatever we're doing at school. So that was kind of my experience this week. Is okay, yeah, I don't like this story, but I guess I just need to take a look at it. I'm going to take a look at it again just to see if something pops out at me. And we've done some of this work before. We've looked at some of these things before. But this week, for some reason, the depth of this story really began to hit home. Just like when I was talking about singing Hava Nagila, right? Hava Nagila is something I'm real familiar with in second grade. And now I look at those words and it's about awakening our brothers, right? In joy. And there's so much more depth and meaning to it than just singing a song in second grade from the songbook, right? So that's the kind of thing I experience here with this. So the identity of the cast, I put this in your notes, the identity of the cast tells a lot of the story. Because every word, right, when you look at literature, you look at something that's meaningfully literature, you have to look at, everything has a meaning, right? Somebody once said something like, if there's a shotgun on the mantle, it has to go off by the second or third act, otherwise it's just useless, right? It doesn't have any meaning. So everything is important here, right? So we can look at the identity of the cast, and when you dive into the Hebrew context of these names and who these people are, it tells the whole story. Or it tells a deeper aspect of the story, right? So when we look at these people, and the story tells us this, gives us this information in the cast. So first we have the creators, who is the mother and the father, right? The mother, we know, what do we know about the mother? She's an Israelite from the tribe of Dan. We also find out her name later on. What's her name? Shlomit. Shlomit is her name, right? So the mother, her name is Shlomit. She's from the tribe of Dan. She's an Israelite, right? So we have to get all that in our mind here for the identity of this role in this story. Shlomit, from the tribe of Dan, an Israelite. And then we know she's married to an Egyptian. Now that should strike you as odd right off, right? Right, they're in the wilderness, they came out of Egypt, and now she's married to an Egyptian. What does that tell us? That's just strange, right? But it tells us something, because we know that there was a mixed multitude that came with Israel, right? And so here you have, in this story, a woman from the tribe of Dan who's married to an Egyptian, which means that that Egyptian is somehow deeply connected to the community, right? For them to have a relationship, fall in love, get married, have a son, right? It means that that Egyptian is an integrated part of the community, right? I mean, if it's a literature that's telling us a story, and that's a part of the story, it has to have meaning, something like that, right? Of course, meaning is always up to interpretation, but I'm just trying to look for the big chunks that we can kind of arrange on the table to get this in mind. So we have Shlomit, who is a daughter, who is of the tribe of Dan, and is an Israelite. We have an Egyptian who has likely been assimilated into the life of Israel through this woman who is an Israelite, right? And then now they have a son. And this son is identified as Mechalel, and I misspelled that on your paper. I'm sorry. I put M-E-L. It's actually there's no L in between the mem and the kuf, so it's Mechalel. So the son of these two is the Mechalel. Mechalel means one who curses. He's the cursor, right? And who has he cursed? He's cursed HaShem. He's cursed God by using his name, right? And again, when it says he said Yud He Vav He, when you're looking at this from a literary standpoint, it's not just something that came out of his mouth. It's an intent in his heart to do damage in that way, right? To curse God. So he is likely very upset with God, right? And so now you have to look at this whole scenario and say, okay, well, if that's important to the story, why is he upset? Why is he upset with God? Mm-hmm. And then we also know that there's another man who's just an Israelite, a passerby, if you will, or whatever, who the son has gotten into a fight with. And so that's important, right? Because as a result of this fight, he's now cursing God. So there's something going on here that's pretty significant. What is happening there? So now we have to look at this story with those pieces.
And he's a man, he's not a boy.
Yes, he's a grown, well, he should be responsible for himself, yeah. So as we begin to look at this, what kinds of assumptions can we make about why this guy is so upset and why he does what he does?
Well, I look at it too, there's a cultural difference, right?
Between
the Egyptian
man and
Israel, the Israelite man, right? So
Andy.
right.
Well,
even though they came out in a multitude, like you were saying, there's a cultural difference to how they're going to look at stuff. And I look at this, and Israelites are a patriarchy, and she's a woman, yes, but she doesn't have the rights as if he was born of a father who was Israeli, the mother. So there's rights he's going to be. I'm looking at culture. There's things that he's going to be excluded from.
Right, and that's just a matter of law.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no emotionalism in that. That's just, this is the law. This is how we do things in our culture. Tribal affiliation is through the father.
Right.
That's the patriarchal system, right? Good or bad, you may have negative feelings about that's also, but this is a structure that's based on that culture of that day for the purpose of community and longevity and all those kinds of things that come into play. So yeah, that's the first key, is that this son of this couple has an identity issue. And that identity issue comes out in, for example, if he were an adult, where is he going to put his tent? He's going to put a tent with the tribe of Dan, because his mother is the tribe of Dan. But patriarchy follows your father, so your father is Egyptian. So what do those Danites say when he goes to set up the tent amongst them? You don't belong here.
Yeah.
You don't belong here. Your patriarchy is to your father, an Egyptian, not your mother. So you don't belong here. Go sit your tent up somewhere else, right? So now you begin to see something of maybe a bit of compassion for this guy who is being shoved aside because of his position, which, by the way, what responsibility does he bear for where he sits in that? None. Why? Because he was created by his parents, and he is who he is. Right? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And now we start to get to this concept of identity issues, and I think this is the root of why identity is such a big deal today. It's because it's a big deal, right? And there are aspects of our identity that we're born with, right? Like this guy, he was born a mixture of the tribe of Dan and Egyptian. That's his lot in life. I was born of two parents from Japan, and I know my heritage is 99.99% Japanese. Northern Japan and southern Japan. So we're like that's as far as my genes go back in terms of any form of that, right? So it's like he's born who he is, and from a technical standpoint, he just has to deal with it because he has no choice, right? And that's can be a challenging thing for anybody, right? Especially when your feelings start getting in the way of and how you get treated by other people, and all these things start to affect him, and now he has to respond somehow. And if he's trying to set up his tent and he doesn't have, among the Danites, and where's he going to go? Set it up outside, The guy has an issue or a problem, and that's likely, you could probably say that's maybe where some of his anger came from. He's cursing God because who put him in the position of being of mixed race? His creators. Ultimately, his mom and his dad, and ultimately God is the creator of everything, right? So he, as a part of this community, has nowhere to turn except to, if he's going to reject who he is, he's got to either be angry with his parents or with God. And what it says in the text is he curses God. He's blaming God. He says, "You made me this way. You put me here, and it stinks."
And God made the rules.
And God made the rules, exactly.
Yeah.
You made the rules. So what if I don't like the rules, then all I can do is reject you. And the reason why I'm saying all of this is because I believe that God did make the rules. He made the rules, he set up the patriarchy, he did all these things for the benefit of the community and so forth. And this guy just winds up as a quote-unquote victim of his circumstances. But by the way, all of us can find some victimhood in all of our lives. We can all find something that we can, cry victim, for us. But the question I think that's being presented here is what do you do with that when you experience it? And this is where I think this case law story right here becomes so huge. Because in the midst of all of God's laws on either side of this story, he's telling us in this story not what the rules are, but he's asking us the question, where is your heart? Where is your heart in all of this? And I'm going to tell you why I think that, and why it's so important, why it's really, it's kind of blasted me this week. It's really affected me about how I think, how I act, and I'm just so surprised that each week I find from the Torah that I've read many, many, many times, something that just knocks me off my rocker. And this is one of those things. So we get that picture. So after reading through the text, looking at this, and by the way, I want you to look at one other thing that is questionable here. So we have this story about the man, and we know what's told about it. But look, towards the middle or end of this short little narrative, it talks about what you're supposed to do with this man. It says, take the man who cursed outside the camp, and have everyone who heard him. And again, when they talk in a piece of literature like this, when they say everyone who heard him, they're not saying, "Oh, I heard him say something." No, they're saying they understand. They heard him They heard his heart and his vitriol, his antagonism. They knew what this was all about, right? And so those are the people that are gonna stone him, and then tell the people of Israel, whoever curses God will bear the consequences of his sin. So it's like laying down the law. I mean, that's pretty harsh, right? And I can see why people say, yeah, the Torah, pretty harsh, but it doesn't leave it there. So it says, whoever blasphemes the name of Adonai must be put to death. And the foreigner as well as the citizen. Now, all of a sudden, when it says the foreigner as well as the citizen, something else is coming into this narrative right here, right? Because God just doesn't say, I'm laying down the law. He's saying there's an aspect of the law that applies to the foreigner and the citizen. And when we think about our story, what does that have to do with the story? You got a foreigner, and you have, right? You got this Egyptian who's married the dad, right? And you have this complication and God's saying that this rule applies for everybody. On all sides of the story, right? Right? So
live among your midst, and this isn't the only time we'll hear that.
Well, in your myths?
Yeah, remember that? Because some of the Passover, you can't have them unless they're circumcised.
Yeah,
so you're going to be.
There's
some clarity. Some of it we don't hear that, but then we do. It's very specific.
This case law is very specific to the application.
Yeah, and there are others like it, but there's others where it's not applied or that specific. Yeah, it makes a difference.
It's not quite following what difference it makes whether he's seen as Egyptian or Jewish. It doesn't make any difference whether he's seen himself as Egyptian or as Jewish or whether it's his identity. It's that he's blaspheming, not cussing. He is vilifying the name of God.
Right. And the question is, what would lead him to do that? Now, from a black and white standpoint, in terms of judgment, and that's part of what this is teaching too. There's two sides of this, right? It's saying he's guilty of what he did. He's deserving of death. The law says death. Kill him, right? It's very black and white from the perspective of justice and the law, right? But that's not all that's being said here, right? So now when it's introduced that it doesn't matter if you're a citizen of Israel or a foreigner in our midst, you're subject. All of you are subject. So it's pulling in this story by saying that the mother, the father, the son, it doesn't matter if he's half and half or one or the other, but if he's in your midst and he's part of this community, the law applies to him. And like I said, that can seem harsh, but it goes on. It just doesn't. The text does not just leave this there. So it states the law and the fact that it applies to the foreigner and the citizen. But then look what goes on next, verse 17. Anyone who strikes another person and kills him must be put to death. Okay, what does that have to do with our story? Who struck somebody and killed them? Oh.
That's where I'm looking.
Whoa, really?
Yeah.
Oh. Okay, but that's outside of our story. But that's gonna be part of it though.
Yes.
Wait, so who in our story did that? Nobody. Nobody struck somebody and killed them. You had two guys that got in a fight from different, you have all these other details, all these social justice issues. Like I said, I don't ever combine social and justice. There isn't just justice, but you have all these other issues, social issues that come into play here, right? And in the text it says that these laws applies to foreigners and citizens, therefore that's an issue here. And then it says, who strikes somebody and kills them? In the narrative, nobody did. Not in this narrative. So it is, like the Lord is saying, it's potentially referencing a bigger picture. This is a picture, but there's a bigger picture that this sits in the context of. Yeah.
It's all connected in the fact that killing a man versus killing an animal has a different situation. But it's like, this is about God. We can't do anything with God. We can't harm him. We can't, But his name, we can do injustice and glorify his name.
Yeah. That goes back to way too complicated for this moment, but if you've heard me talk about the 10 Commandments, right? There's 10 Commandments, there's 5 and 5, and how they match up. And the way I see them matching up is, I am the Lord your God. I am God, basically. And on the other side is, do not murder, right? And those match up because you can't kill God, but what can you do? You can ignore him. You can pretend he doesn't exist. You can blaspheme his name. You can say, it basically means to poke holes in who he is and just drain him of all value. You can't kill him, but you can do that. So that's how
it's even worse though, because the word that they're using in the English is to curse, and blasphemy is a type of cursing which has malevolence or really awful darkness attached to it.
It has the concept of piercing. Piercing to the standpoint, like it's used in other scriptures for like holes in your pocket. You put your money into the hole, the money just goes right out because you pierced, So it's draining. It sucks the life out of you. It's, those kinds of things. So.
We're talking about talking with extreme anger, extreme hatred attached to it.
It's speech, but it's more than speech.
It's not just talking. So like, so it flips into Matthew 12.
And it's like God's name. God's name is just not verbalizing it. It's who he is. You're speaking against his essence, his so, yeah.
I was listening to Rabbi Neely was talking about this whole issue about he says it's not just cussing. It's not like cussing when people do it today and they use God's title, and they say that. This is much more, as you said, malevolent. This is about trying to destroy God's reputation and trying to cause harm.
Right.
And by doing that, whatever it is, and that's so different.
So, I want to now connect what you said about, so Moshe killed somebody, right? So again, when you read the text here, when it starts talking about who killed somebody, well, nobody did, and what does animals have to do with it? There's no animals in this story. There's injured to his neighbors. Well, these two guys did get in a fight. What about eye for an eye? All this issue, and that's in the midst of this text. It says, he who kills an animal to make restitution, but he who kills another person is to be put to death. And you apply the same standard of judgment to the foreigner as a citizen, because I am Adonai your God. And then it says, so Moshe and the people of Israel took the man and stoned him. Right? So those are in the midst of the story, because the final thing is they took him out and stoned him. Now, so if you're not struggling with that, if you don't think, this is a weird story, I don't understand it, and it's harsh, it's weird, but it's so important, and that's why I think it's imperative that we wrestle with these thoughts. And fortunately for us, a lot of people have, sages have wrestled with, lots of people wrestle with, and we get some answers for some of this. Particularly if you read the Torah a certain way. Intertextuality is the way I've learned that you gain so much from the Torah. These things appear here and they appear here, they're connected together, right? So, you brought up the point that Moshe killed a man. So, one of the intertextuality concepts in this verse is it says, here in this verse, it says, Vayikra ben Isha Yisraelit, there's a son of an Israelite woman who went out, and he was the son, ben Ish Mitzri. Ish Mitzri. He was a son of an Egyptian. Well, it turns out that term Ish Mitzri is only used 3 times in all of Scripture. Right? So intertextuality, right? And we can look at those other 3 times that Ish Mitzri is used, that exact same phrase or words. We can look at the times that those are used and maybe see some kind of connection, right? So, when was the first time Ish Mitzri was used? The first time it was used, well, do you remember an Egyptian man? Moses killed, right? Exodus 2:11. Vayamim hachem vayigdal Moshe. And it was on those days, Moshe had grown up. Vayetze el echav vayar besivlotam. he went out to his brothers and saw their forced labor. Vayar ish Mitzri, and he saw an Egyptian man striking a Hebrew man from his brothers. So now here you have an Egyptian man and a Hebrew man, and right, and you have the exact phrase ish Mitzri, a man, an Egyptian man. That's the same words that are used to describe our cursor's father, right? Ish Mitzri. So you could say there's a hint there, a possibility that those things are connected. And the sages see that, of course, and they go to town and they say that this Ish Mitzri in our passage about was the son of that Egyptian that Moses killed.
Yeah, I saw.
Right? In the Midrash. It says, yeah, the tribe of Dan, this woman married the son of the Egyptian that Moshe killed in Egypt, which caused him to flee, right? Which makes a unique story, because now you see that guy's son left with the children of Israel. Therefore, he might have had a struggle with his own father, that Egyptian, and his son. His son may have thought, Dad, what you guys are doing are wrong, and I don't like this because these Hebrews are people. And he ends up marrying an Israeli, right? Yeah. So you begin to see this story maybe stretching back to possibly, and this is all, the text doesn't say this, but this is, a possibility, right, for interpreting. That it reaches back to the time in Egypt. Why did this guy leave with Israel? Because he didn't like what was happening in Egypt. And his father maybe was the one that Moshe killed, and it just makes an intriguing bit more, the story more intriguing, right? And the fact that we have this Ish Mitzri, this textual connection. Well, so when is the next time we hear of an Egyptian man? And I'd give any of you 5 stars if you can tell me when the next time you remember in the text of Torah where it mentions an Ish Mitzri. In the Torah. And I'll give you a hint. It's not much longer after Moshe kills this Ish Mitzri. What happens? Moshe flees because of that, and he goes where? To Midian. And when he goes to Midian, he comes across a well where we know men and women get connected over, right? And yeah, what? Yeah, so the gals go to Dad and he says, how come you guys got back so soon? They said, an Egyptian man saved us from the other shepherds. Who was that Egyptian man? Moshe. Oh, interesting. The first Ish Mitzri is the guy that Moshe kills. The next Ish Mitzri is Moses himself. Whoa. And then the third Ish Mitzri is the guy in our story. So if you're using intertextuality to interpret the Torah, this is telling you.
What's the address of the other?
2:11.
2:11, got that.
2:19.
2:19, okay.
And they said, Ish Mitzri delivered us. An Egyptian man delivered us. And of course, we know that's Moshe, right? Mm-hmm. So 2:11, 2:19, and then our passage. 24:10. Those are the 3 times you see Ish Mitzri in the Torah. And some people say that's just a coincidence, but when you look at this story and what's happening here in the story, you have, I think, a deeper picture of the significance of this little narrative.
Could you spell the word you're talking about?
It's right there.
Ish.
Ish.
It's
Second line, red.
Second line red, okay.
It's in the middle of the sentence. It's
Ben Ish Mitzri. Yeah.
Well, it's Ben Ish, but
He's the son of an Egyptian man.
Ben is son.
Ish Mitzri. Now Mitzri is like Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim is Egypt. A Mitzri is an Egyptian. So.
Rick, I had a comment when I was reading some of the commentaries. that this Egyptian man knew to curse. Like, you know, they were still dealing with idols and multiple gods. They knew the value of
The Egyptian, yeah, he was
Yeah,
familiar with idolatry of the
and
Egyptian.
it's not, you know, you think about it when the Egyptians fought with each other. Was thinking they had their little gods. It's like, you know, your God, I'm going to curse this god or that god. They had so many gods, but he was very attuned to what was going on to do the blasphemy for the Lord of the Israelites. That was anyway.
Yeah.
That was a kind of an underlying thing to hit me.
So what do you think is the big significance of those three sightings? Why is it wow for you?
Well, because I love intertextuality. For one.
Yeah.
And when something only happens 3 times, that's a pretty good clue. And 3 is a
A
kind
clue of what though? I mean,
Okay.
give me,
Okay,
I'm looking
Okay.
for a target here.
I'll get there. Yeah, Wayne.
The first time the reference is used to refer to an Egyptian. The second time the reference is used to refer to an Israelite.
Who looks like an Egyptian?
Who grew up in the Egyptian court, but yeah,
And looks
it is-
like
The
an Israelite.
third time it's used to refer to the son of an Egyptian and an Israelite.
yeah.
So to me it's saying it doesn't make any difference. God's rules and laws apply whether you're Jewish or non-Jewish or the product of non-Jewish and Jewish together.
Wow.
God's rules apply to all of us, to mankind, to Adam.
Yes. Yeah.
No, I was just thinking about for me, the point. I was listening to a couple of different rabbis when they were talking about this, of correcting or focusing now that they have the laws on correcting some of the things that happened in the past. That made me think what they're doing here. I mean, it makes total sense now when you see, you go through this whole way of looking at it, that it's here where it should be as a case law and why it fits. And then there's this equal justice that takes place. I think about the law where a husband can't marry 2 sisters, and that was kind of what was happening.
It's kind of focusing
It's focusing,
behavior and activity
right,
and
things
culture.
that happened prior to the law, that now these things are changing, and you see those brought up, and that's kind of how they're
Mhm.
pointing. This case law was to make a point of righting a wrong, so to speak, and moving forward and understanding its implications and.
Yeah.
So.
But I also think and yeah, that's a huge part of the whole direction of Torah. And one of the things that should cause us to have is humility in how we see and judge things today, and or versus the past, And back to that question, what this is, I think the key to this whole passage is it's talking about where is your heart in all of this. Mm-hmm. Here's why I say that. When it starts talking about anyone who kills a person, right, which seems out of context, and then you start pulling in these things like, well, Moshe killed somebody, and at the end of the story, the people kill somebody, right? Who did the people kill? The cursor. Right?
Yeah.
God didn't say, I'm going to execute him, or I'm going to strike him with lightning. No, he says the people have to do this. And all of a sudden, as I was reading this, I understood why I struggle with this so much. It's because God wants me to struggle with it. He wants me to struggle with what's being expressed here. Because executing justice sometimes does not feel good. You've just killed somebody, and God says He's gonna kill you or take your life if you kill somebody. But we just killed. How does this all compute? And God is saying, I want you to struggle with that. Why? Because this guy's sin was his own responsibility, and he's bearing the consequences of it, because that's the law. But why? Why is he bearing this? What caused the situation? And he's not saying that the justice, all this is just and so forth, it's by the law. But as you're dealing with the discomfort of the situation, he wants us to think.
No, I was just thinking what you're saying about the heart. I mean, Moshe changed.
Mm-hmm.
He
Moshe killed somebody, therefore he should be killed, but...
Correct. this gentleman had the opportunity to accept his situation in life, because in the culture he lived in, there are a lot of people that are in a circumstance or a situation where they were slaves or this, and this was their lot in life at the time. He had the opportunity to make that change in his heart. He chose not to. I think about King David. King David made mistakes, but it was his heart, and God talked about it being his heart. His heart is what God looked at. He changed. So
a possibility is when God's executing judgment like this, he's saying basically that person has chosen their path and they are so far down it that for the sake of the rest of the community, you can't have that in the community or it's going to destroy the community. So there has to be some being cut off from your people, right? Kind of, and that's that concept. But I want to say,
Well, it's still happening today.
Oh,
Something
sure.
that happened in our community. It is hard to even listen to see the videos. Everybody's talking about it. It's like, this can't happen in our community. But it did. Everybody knows it did. They have it on video. But we're saying, you can't have this happen again. They have to try those two 16-year-olds as adults because they need to show the whole community, you don't do this. I don't care how angry you are.
Yeah. So there's a classic example, I think, of struggling with this even in the last week or two of our lives, right? If you're in the community, you know.
Yes.
And but here's where I want to go with this, and maybe you can give me a minute just to finish this, and then we can talk about it, because so when we read this thing about when anyone kills another person, and then you start thinking, well, and then at the end it says, and they went out and they killed this man. So the concept of struggling with that is that, okay, this person got what they deserved, and we can say that in justice in our own mind. But perhaps what's being spoken of here is how do our hearts sit with all of that? And the concept here, I mean, just think about this as a story. If you could go back and change the story, right? That's something we like to do. If we can go back in time, we could change this. What if the Danites would have said, "Oh, you're Shlomit's son? Yeah, your dad's Egyptian, but come here, put your tent here, put it you're among us. We know your heart." What would have happened if he faced a little more acceptance in the community? Do you think it's possible that his heart and his identity could have been healed a bit, where he wouldn't have got to the point where he blamed God? And I'm not saying that he doesn't need to take responsibility for his actions, because clearly he does. But what if? And I can't help but think that if I'm throwing the stones to kill this guy, is it possible that my heart is saying, is there anything I could have done to prevent this? Is there anything I could have, 16-year-olds shooting people, is there anything I could have done? In my parenting, in my school, is there something I could have done to prevent this? Is there something I could have said? And I suspect that what God wants us to do with this story is, as we're walking through our lives, we're thinking to ourselves, how can I express compassion to those people around me who are struggling with these things while they're on their path towards wherever they're going? Can I show more compassion to somebody? And structure it within the law, because I can recognize the law. I could say, yes, you don't have a part in the tribe of Dan. But I could also say, but I'm going to give you one. Come put your tent by me. There's room right here. Come here. Be a part of it. Be a part of us. The law says I don't have to do that. As a matter of fact, I'm right to say you don't belong here in some ways. But is that really what God wants in our hearts? Do you see how this story and this outcome and this wording in the text, and I love how you brought in Moshe. He killed somebody, but nobody killed him. This text says he should have been killed because he killed somebody, right? And now we find out, and I think we're supposed to wrestle with that too. We're supposed to wrestle with the fact that we're all murderers to some degree, right? And as much as I struggle with this, I love the discomfort. Yeah. And I want to just embrace that and sit with it and feel it, because in some way it really changes my heart and my perspective, and my sense of compassion. And how does God want me to be his agent in this world?
Yeah, I really identify with you right now with my brother's suicide, because I have those questions. What if we were estranged? And what I'm finding is I am struggling. It does feel very uncomfortable. There's nothing I can do. But what I can do is my heart for his family. Maybe I pray we can come together again. My brother and I are getting back together, but we're estranged. And there's this change that's happening in me that I know is going to affect my world, because I don't know. I just feel like I'm changing. This discomfort, this wish it wouldn't happen. All of that is causing me to be. I understand what you're saying. What I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and a part of it is not to put a guilt trip on anybody to say that they caused this guy to do, because
but being close to God brings these kind of things.
Yeah.
I thought it says that Jesus says it's okay if you put him down, but if you mock God, that's a no-no. You know, if you say something bad about God, you're not going to make it to heaven. That's what I read in here. Is that true?
Yeah.
Does that have something to do with it? He shouldn't have cursed God. That's why God showed him, don't curse me.
Well, now
That's why the death penalty was issued. That, I think, if you were going to put that in a category of the Ten Commandments, it would go under the idolatry factor in 3 death penalty offenses.
Yeah, and that's a part of what we have to struggle with. And a part of that message can be for us too, as we're walking our own path. How far have we gone? You know, where we can't come back anymore. You know, so it's kind of like saying, like this guy, if he were, even though he were rejected by his own people or whatever, how is he dealing with that? If you face rejection, how do you deal with that? Do you curse God because of how he made you, or do you accept that and try to figure out how to work? So there's lessons on both sides. Absolutely. So
I was just thinking about how God does stuff, right? In all these cases with Moshe, yes, he killed a man. He didn't pay the consequence, so to speak, at that particular time, but you see his writing. I think about the example of King David, right, where he had Uriah killed, you know. But it wasn't, Bathsheba wasn't punished for the problem because King David was the king. What was she supposed to do on some levels and where her position was? But because of David's heart and he changed, he suffered consequences in his family with his other sons. But the blessing that came, the mercy that God showed to Bathsheba in having Solomon as the king that followed. I mean, you look at this, that God knows the heart, and he's, you know, to us at the beginning we might think this is not fair. David did suffer consequences for his actions and his family's disruptions and the problems he faced. But there was that mercy he also showed for Bathsheba in blessing and having Solomon take the reins afterwards. So you look at this stuff and you think, okay, where it talks about when a person's being put to death, and then they talk about that, but it's about justice, and justice isn't just black and white. He's showing that there are circumstances, and it gets back down to the heart, you know.
Yeah, where's your heart in all this? And by the way, there's another story in the book of Judges, chapter 17 and 18, and I wasn't going to bring this up because I haven't assimilated enough of that into be able. But the concept in that story in the book of Judges is about the tribe of Dan. That's the connection to our thing. It's the tribe of Dan, and it's about how this idolatry got into the tribe of Dan, but they used religiosity as a weapon, right? Kind of like what you might see here is that judgment is executed kind of in a black and white form. But a part of what that story is saying is that you can't use religion as a weapon. You know, because where's your heart in it? You're using it because you want to get your way or whatever it is out of it, and you're using religion to do that, right? And so that story is like the second chapter of this thing right here, where it talks about maybe, and potentially the warning here is that you don't want to use pure justice and laws and all that to, overrule your heart in preventing or having compassion or whatever. It's a struggle, clearly. So yeah.
It reminds me of a story where I think it was Yeshua who was talking, and this lady came up and she said that she wanted a blessing or something like that. And he said, why should the dogs get a blessing from the table of blessing? And she said, well, even the dogs eat the crumbs from the table of their masters. And he said, your faith is through you. So her heart was not to accept insult, but to accept whatever God would give her, anything.
That's an excellent example, because she could have just said, you call me a dog? Yeah. You're not from God. There's no way you can be from God, and she could have just walked away. But her heart of humility, her heart of accepting who she was, I don't remember, was that the salvations from the Jews? Or no, that was the Samaritans. But that concept of accepting who you are, where God's put you, yet participating in His plan.
The idea of all of the people having to participate in stoning, does not make me think about what could I have done differently. It makes me accountable in my own life for the laws of God. In other words, how do I respond to God? What kind of life am I living? What kind of example am I setting? Because I have to be responsible for the outcomes of the law of God in this world in which I live. So it's like my responsibility is like, wait a second, the law is the law, it's the law for everybody else. But when I have to stone someone, when I have to take a life because of the law becomes personal to me, and the consequences of the law become personal to me. So I am more accountable to the law and to the Lord for the law because of that, as opposed to, well, what could I have done different?
Well, but I would like to say, at least for me, is there are black and white things like picking up this stone and throwing it or whatever, but there's also the heart issue for me is to say, yes, that is the law, but again, where is my heart in this? Part of the reason why I say that is I think of my kids and my grandkids, and how is it possible that something I do as a leader in the family could help shape them to the point where they would never get to that point where they would not appreciate or understand who they are versus who God made them to be, and it makes me even want to make sure even more that there is this gratitude and expression and all the things that we do, that I do, to bring that about for them, even though they're going to be responsible for their own decisions.
But it's the same thing. It's just a different approach to that same thing, because I want to be accountable, because now I understand the weight and the value and the actual, the seriousness of God's laws. In other words, there is an impact that comes with God's laws, and a responsibility, if you want to use that word instead, that becomes mine. It makes it personal to me all of a sudden.
I think what I'm hearing you talk about is that in picking up the stone to be part of the executions God, suddenly there's a spotlight internally on what's going on in here. That is comparable to the guy that I'm about to throw this rock at.
And it's a hard issue.
Yeah, now it's I have to participate in this justice system, but the light is right here.
So it's a similar thing, just approaching it from a different.
I can see that. And the fact that it's not Moshe or Aharon who are executing this judgment, it's all of the people. Mm-hmm. It's like you're bringing in,
Yeah.
Joshua had a couple of scriptures that I didn't get a chance in the discussion to, anyways. So there's Acts 16:3, And it says, Shaul wanted Timothy to accompany him, so he took him and did a great milah because of the Jews living in those areas, for they all knew that his father had been Greek. And then...
So a Hebrew mother and a Greek father, is that right?
And then in 2 Timothy 3:15, that's right. It's in the middle of a sentence though, so I'm going to do 14 and 15. But you continue in what you have learned and have become convinced of, recalling the people from whom you learned it, and recalling too how from your childhood you have known the Holy Scriptures, which can give you the wisdom that leads to deliverance through trusting in Yeshua Himself.
Yeah.
You said Kefa was optional. When I see optional, I can do that one. And first Kefa, chapter 2, verse 1.
Wow, somebody knows their Bible.
First Kefa 2.
Therefore, rid yourselves of all malice,
Yep.
all deceit, hypocrisy, and envy, and of all the ways there are of speaking against people.
What's that option?
That's not optional, yeah, I do.
What was that? What was the address of the last one?
1 Peter 2:1.
2:1?
I think, you have to make a tie-in when we talk about blasphemy, we have to go to the brief Hadashah. So, because that's such a controversial situation. But if we're thinking about blasphemy being cursing and being malevolent, being hateful, and you're done, with God, then what Yeshua says in Matthew 12 makes more sense. When he says, it's chapter 12, verse 30, those who are not with me are against me, and those who do not gather with me are scattering. And that's coming in under Yeshua's leadership. Because of this, I tell you that people will be forgiven any sin and blasphemy, they will be forgiven. But blaspheming the Ruach HaKodesh will not be forgiven.
Yeah, that's what Richard brought up.
Right. So one can say something against the Son of Man, so you can say something against Jesus and be forgiven. But whoever keeps on speaking against the Ruach HaKodesh, the breath of God, I will translate that as, the very person of God, will never be forgiven, neither in the Olam Hazeh, the here and now, or the Olam Haba, in the time to come. When you go after the very, the breath of God, who in Genesis was the breathing over his creation, that's him, that's just God. And you are gonna, and it said, keep on speaking with hate toward him, and never having anything in you that's wanting to turn to him in any kind of loving way. No korban there, no drawing near to God. We are repelling and backpedaling as far away as possible. Then it's the never situation. Then we're probably in the same situation that we just read about with this guy, that he was so angry, so hateful for whatever his situation was, because we're speculating at the Midrash, but whatever would cause him to say whatever he said that would warrant the death penalty, would put him in that category of never. That's the thing.
And I think there's a lot of gray area there, though.
Oh yeah.
When you're evaluating sin and forgiveness and all that.
But who knows that? That's why I think,
That's
in the situation that we just read today, the only one in the universe who knew the extent of it was God.
Right.
And it wasn't just, he hurt my feelings.
Yeah.
There was something else going on that only God knew. So.
Well, you see examples of it today in society, where a person because they can't accept their lot in life or their situation, or they think they deserve more, and how devastating they can be to their family or to somebody else. And it becomes very destructive, and it's hard to deal with. And I mean, like Don was saying, God knew to the extent. You know, does it mean that people can't change? People can change, but once you've gone off out of balance in that regard, I mean, God knew he was a goner, so to speak. Otherwise, it would have been different. He would have treated it differently, and because you see that he's treated other things like that differently, but not in this.
Yeah, God gave Pharaoh 10 chances.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, it's the same thing.
Could turn to any point.
The same thing that's said in Hebrews chapter 6, where it says, if they continue to keep doing this, there's no way to bring them back. They just keep hammering.
Well, and then the other part of that is having compassion for the community, because how long can the community put up with this division, this negativity, or whatever it is,
and stay healthy
and survive? Even I mean, at some point there has to be a cutting off for compassion of the community. So it goes so many different ways, and ultimately, I like that concept. God is going to be the judge of all that. Thankfully, we don't have to be. But I also think that along those lines, that we can't write off people who God hasn't written off either. Right. So there's anyway, it's a struggle, and if nothing else, I'm glad I get to put up my struggles. and I just think that there is so much beyond words and law and all that that's in this narrative, in the midst of the text of the law, right? That is so deep, and I don't know, it touches my heart. It really makes me ask that question: where is my heart in all of these things? Man, I'd love to talk about this more, because when I get here. Good thoughts. Thank you for sharing. We good? All right. This week in the counting of the Omer, we move from humility from Hod to Yesod. If you're counting the Omer in the traditional fashion, refining our walk, and for another 2 weeks, right? For the counting of the Omer.
And ladies, 1 week from Wednesday, we meet at Angie's for Rosh Hashanah.
Okay.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
A week.
A week from Wednesday.
Wow. All right. You ready?
Yep.
Yes, let's stand together, and we will sing Psalms 7 as we is our tradition in this season of the counting of the Omer. Be merciful and bless us. Cause your face to shine. Shine your face on us. That your way may be known in all the earth. Fill your way. other. It is our duty to praise your name, praise the Master of all, to ascribe greatness to the one who created from the beginning, that he called us from the nations of the earth and chose us as his family, a treasured people, placing our portion in Yeshua. We are your people whom you redeemed. We therefore bow and worship and give thanks before the King of Kings, the Holy One. Blessed is he who extends the heavens and establishes the earth, whose throne of glory is in the heavens above, and whose power's presence is in the highest of heights. He is our God, there is no other. Truly he is our King, there is none else. As it is written in his Torah, you shall know and take to heart this day that Adonai is God, in heaven above and on earth below, there is no other. Therefore we place our hope in you, Adonai our God, that we may soon see the glory of your power, when you will remove abominations from the earth, and idols will be utterly destroyed, when the world will be perfected under the sovereignty of the Almighty, when all humanity will call on your name to turn all the earth's wicked towards you, and all the world's inhabitants will realize and know that to you every knee must bow, every tongue swear loyalty before you, Adonai our God. We will kneel and bow down and give honor to your glorious name. We will all accept the yoke of your kingdom, and you will reign over us soon and forever. For the kingdom is yours, and to all eternity you will reign in glory, as it is written in your Torah. Adonai will reign forever and ever, and it is said, then Adonai shall be king over all the earth. On that day, Adonai shall be one, and his name one. Father, we bless you and thank you for this Shabbat, and for these days that you have chosen for us to live. And I pray that in the coming days you would just reveal light and truth and wisdom to our hearts, Lord. That you would order our steps, and as we walk before you, that your blessing will come to us and to all that we contact. And we just pray for your strength and your guidance in these days. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher noten lanu et hadvar hachayim beYeshua HaMashiach. Blessed are you, Adonai our God, King of the universe, who gives to us the living word in Messiah Yeshua. Amen. 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 Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. Amen.